Hi, welcome. My name is Lauren Cafaro, and I'm a first-year student at App State, where I've declared communication sciences and disorders as my major. This field interests me because I've always loved working with people of all ages, and it has multiple job titles that I'm interested in, such as occupational therapy or speech pathologist. Some of my other interests include hanging out with my friends, going to the beach, and traveling. I also enjoy helping the community, and I've always been involved with volunteer work and community service, ever since middle school to now. My service toward the community involves things such as building houses, volunteering at daycares, going on missions trips, and participating in fundraisers. This is the reason I did my project on volunteering. About my paper. Originally, when planning out my paper, I had volunteering down as my overall topic of discussion. But after talking to some of my peers, I figured that the topic of volunteering was too broad and narrowing it down to voluntourism was better. Voluntourism is a real thing in today's generation. It can be negatively impacting host communities without giving any awareness to the group of volunteers traveling. People waste money and time on experiences to luxurious tropical places where the vacation side aspect of the trip is formed. Hundreds to millions of dollars are spent on these trips, and a large majority goes toward the vacation aspect. Volunteers create a short-term trip to communities while contributing no benefits due to the lack of skills and uninformed education of the culture and community, which can lead to negative impacts to the ones that live within the community. There are ways to avoid making volunteering overseas look negative by researching for the correct organizations in the first place and applying your skills in the best ways possible. I like the topic I chose for this paper. I believe I was able to find multiple sources to add in my paper that would support my points and claims. When reflecting back on my paper, I realized I could have spent way more time on finding more sources, such as volunteering organizations, that could have strengthened my paper's reliability. However, I do believe with what I have, the sources supported my claims in a decent way. I believe some goals I accomplished were writing with authority. In this class, I believe that by choosing a topic we were passionate about from the beginning really helped bring out my voice in my writing and when speaking to my classmates and in my podcast. If we were assigned a topic, I think it would have been difficult and had a different outcome on how well we wrote with a strong voice. I most likely could have incorporated my voice into my paper more, especially since the paper was mainly trying to convince someone of my opinions. Another goal I accomplished is analyzing documents of primary and secondary sources. I learned where to find good documents and sources on the App State Library website. This resource enabled me to find reliable sources as well as educational ones. I was able to find sources that were more reliable and had more information that fit my thesis better. About my podcast. After submitting my final draft of my paper for grading, I turned my attention to creating my podcast, which was based off my paper. My podcast includes Introduction to Voluntourism, as many people are unaware of what it is and what it means. Then I took the two main points, which were money and skills, from my paper and summarized those points. I also included how to avoid this section on how to avoid volunteering with the wrong organizations. I also had the chance to interview one of my friends who had recently been on a volunteering trip to Peru and asked her some questions on how the experience was. I did not include this interview in my paper because I believed it would have been better to hear the initial interview between us in person. I decided to incorporate some sound effects such as planes taking off and children playing to give the audience a clear idea of what I was pointing on and to enhance my overall podcast. I believe with my paper I had to be more serious and grammatical, but when having the opportunity to create a podcast, it enabled me to bring the seriousness as well as present it with a more laid-back feeling. I also received good feedback from local churches and people who had been on missions trips abroad before, and that those people were unaware of these negative effects and learned something. Many of the audience also concluded they would now be looking for the right organizations, and they now knew how to look for the right organizations. I do believe my podcast filming my podcast was kind of difficult, as it was hard to edit everything together with the time I had, because I kind of pushed off to the end. The course goal I believe I met with this part of the project would be similar to the essay part, when using a strong voice due to the fact that I had a lot of information and knew the topic well. Having a lot of sources and information made me have my podcast in a more serious tone. Here are my closing thoughts on thoughts of growth and thoughts on transfer. Thank you for listening.